If the warhammer is blunt honesty, the morning star is brutality distilled. It is a metal orb bristling with spikes, purpose-built to leave wounds medieval medicine could not meaningfully treat. The name sounds poetic, morning star, Venus at dawn, but the work it does is anything but. In this 8th episode, we examine the weapon some nicknamed the Holy Water Sprinkler for reasons you will not soon forget. We'll see why the no-chain design made it reliable in chaos, how those spikes defeat plate that mocks swords, and why its injuries read like an archaeologist's signature centuries later. Then we pull back to the siege lines, the ballista, a scaled-up crossbow that turns stored torsion into flat, blistering bolts, and its lighter cousin, the scorpion, a medieval sniper that taught soldiers to fear what they could not see. 10 facts, 1 lesson. Terror wears many shapes, some on a handle, some on a carriage. The Morning Star embodies the medieval appetite for simple tools with catastrophic outcomes, a heavy metal sphere set with spikes mounted on a solid haft. Where a flail delegates to a swinging chain, the Morning Star keeps a direct mechanical link from hand to head. That means fewer surprises and fewer self-inflicted disasters. The wielder points, commits, and lands a guided bad dream. The contrast between the weapon's lyrical name and its purpose makes the nickname feel almost cruel. Venus at dawn and blood at noon. Because there is no chain, the head obeys the arm rather than its own delayed orbit. You can start and stop the arc on command, redirect mid-commit, and recover quickly for a second strike or a guard. In tight quarters, stairwells, doorways, press of shield, brawls, the direct haft matters. The Morning Star does not ask for space, it makes it by punishing whatever interrupts its path. Where a flail might carom off stone and try to visit your nose, the Morning Star bites and stays where you told it to be. And that bite is what scares professionals. The spikes are not decoration, they are geometry turned lethal. Each one concentrates momentum onto a contact patch, small enough to defeat metals that seem invulnerable to cutting edges. In the language of physics, it's pressure. In the language of survivors, it's holes that never should have been there. The Morning Star's horror lives in concentration of force. A sword spreads its energy along an edge. A hammer smears it into a dent. But a spiked head drives it through points so tiny, the steel has nowhere to distribute the load. Even if a spike does not fully pass through tempered plate, it can punch past padding, collapse mail rings beneath, and compromise bone in a way a broad, glancing cut cannot. Plate deflects slices. It negotiates poorly with nails the size of your finger moving at speed. Against helmets, spikes exploit every curve. A rounded crown wants to shed blows, but a sharp point that arrives square will bite, then pry as the rest of the head follows. That initial puncture is the passport. The mass behind it is the journey. Visors fare no better when struck at joints or where a vent hole has already thinned the metal. Even when the plate holds, the spike can key into the surface like a climber's pick, yanking a man's head offline, ruining his balance for the follow-up. In line, the weapon's rhythm is simple and cruel. Step, set, drive, then recover along the same path so your neighbor keeps room to breathe. In single combat, it turns feints into promises. You show a shoulder, draw a parry, and send 3 inches of steel through the seam that opened. Armorers learned to flute plates and harden faces, but the math remained unkind. Small point, heavy head, short arc, bad news. Medieval surgery treated slashes with stitching and burns with salves. It had fewer answers for cluster punctures, backed by bone-crushing impulse. Morning Star injuries often arrived as patterns, a group of deep, narrow channels, each with radiating fractures beneath, and collapsed tissue that turned infection into a near certainty. If the patient survived the day, fever and rot waited for the week. Even today, osteologists open graves and recognize the calling card spike spacings and cratered bone that match a head studded at regular intervals. Contemporary accounts describe men who survived the blow and then failed over days, not hours. That is the weapon's second cruelty. It could leave you alive enough to suffer and injured enough to lose. Deep punctures are hard to clean without widening them. Foreign material, bits of cloth, splinters, flakes of metal, ride inside, and seed infection. Compound fractures around a spike channel do not knit neatly, and splintered ribs can turn every breath into a gamble. Battlefield triage developed its own hard calculus. Pull the dying back if you can, but save hands for those with wounds. A barber surgeon has a prayer of fixing. Archaeology keeps telling the same story. Skulls with circular piercings framed by spiderweb cracks. Forearms shattered where someone tried to block what could not be parried. Breastbones cratered like the face of the moon. A morning star leaves evidence that keeps talking centuries later. In some regions, the morning star carried a mordant nickname, the holy water sprinkler. The joke is as medieval as it gets, grim, economical, and lit by the torchlight of a hall where everyone knows exactly what splashes when spikes do their work. The resemblance is visual and visceral, a handled device with a head that sprays when it strikes. Faith and fear lived close together in castles and camps. Humor bridged them with a shrug. Names like this served a purpose. They trained nerves around ugly tools by giving soldiers a way to speak lightly about heavy things. A recruit can repeat a nickname where he can't yet say, "I saw a man's visor flower open." It also reminds you that ceremony and savagery were never far apart. The same men who knelt for blessing might carry a sprinkler to the breach an hour later and make their own rain. Strip away the wordplay and you're left with a simple truth. Everyone respected the morning star because everyone feared the aftermath. If a field surgeon sighed when he saw the holes, the front ranks took the hint long before he did. Compared to fencing with a sword, the morning star demands less finesse and more horsepower. You do not need years of edge alignment. You need shoulders that cash the checks your hands write. The sweet spot is a compact arc with acceleration late, so the head arrives with the last quarter of its swing packed with speed. Too big an arc wastes time. Too small robs power. The reward for good mechanics is obscene efficiency, short steps, tight hips, a snap through the elbow, and a head that lands like a verdict. Training focused on start-stop, control, and recovery. Because there's no hinge, you can arrest mid-swing to avoid a friendly face, or re-aim when your man steps. But you must also be able to kill the motion at the end, so the head doesn't drag you off balance. In the crush, the weapon rewards men who keep their feet beneath their shoulders and their eyes ahead. Overreach and you feed a grappler your arm. Undercommit and you bounce spikes off plate without consequence. When mastered, the tool shines against armored targets. The wielders were often the strong backs of a unit, the ones who split logs in winter and carried stones in summer. In battle, they translated that labor into a language armor, understood, pain arriving faster than the body can budget for it. Morningstar heads varied wildly. You'll see compact 3-inch spheres studded with half-inch spikes, built for speed and repeatability, and brutal 6-inch monsters with spikes 2 or 3 inches long that turn any solid contact into a crisis. The largest heads could weigh up to 10 pounds before the haft, mass enough to break radius and ulna through mail, even if a spike didn't find purchase. Spacing mattered. Even rows risked getting stuck in heavy cloth. Staggered patterns reduced that and ensured at least one spike struck square. Some heads were hollow to keep weight manageable. Others were solid to maximize the "I don't care what you're wearing" factor. Haft length tracked doctrine, short for close work and shield walls, longer for men who needed to reach past a comrade's shoulder and tag helmets in the second rank. The look is unmistakable, a handheld porcupine, optimism for the owner and a geometry problem for everyone else. No scroll work, no courtly brag, just the promise that if it touches you, something important will tear, crack, or both. Shift now from arm's length horror to line of sight doom. The ballista represents one of humanity's first serious experiments in killing at distance by engineering alone. Imagine a crossbow rewritten at giant scale. Twin torsion bundles, twisted skeins of sinew or hair store energy, like angry springs. A slider rails back. A winch sings. A massive bolt locks. The trigger answers. And the machine snaps its will into flight. Because the energy comes from torsion rather than bending wood, properly made ballistae deliver flat, brutal shots. Contemporary reconstructions demonstrate heavy bolts on the order of a couple dozen pounds, leaving the stock at speeds that make eyes water on the order of a fast car in town, except it doesn't brake or swerve. To the target, there's no graceful arc to watch and fear. There's only a sudden line that arrives faster than attention itself. The psychological effect matched the kinetic one. Defenders who mocked ladders and buckets fell silent when the frame creaked. A stone keeps its secrets. A ballista airs them out with a bolt broad as your forearm and a head shaped to argue with gates. You don't shout at courage, you subtract it with carpentry. What does a ballista bolt do? It continues. Through a shield, through a man, sometimes through the man behind him. Unlike arrows, which often tumble or lose stability after impact, a heavy, stiff bolt can carry its line, chewing a path at one height through whatever dares align with it. The result is not merely death, it is the reorganization of a formation. The neat files become a broken fan, each soldier suddenly aware of a corridor of absence where brothers stood a breath ago. Armor buys you less than you hope. Wood splinters under square hits, steel plates crack or are driven back into ribs, mail yields locally as rivets pop and rings burst. Even when a bolt stops against something massive, the transfer throws men like rag dolls. There's a reason siege manuals pair ballistae with suppression, while stones hammer walls, bolts harvest the heads that peak above them. Trajectory matters too. Because the shot is relatively flat, human eyes track it poorly. There is no high arc to warn, no time to kneel after the scream. Men learn to hug merlons and time their looks between the machine's creaks. On a bad day, the creak is a lie. The bolt was already halfway home. If the ballista is the sledge, the scorpion is the stiletto. Lighter torsion, slimmer limbs, refined sliders, everything biases towards speed and accuracy rather than mass. The projectile is often a dart, stiff, narrow, with a small head designed to thread a visor slit or punch mail over a vitals-rich target. Effective ranges stretch beyond 400 yards for practiced crews, and the best shots choose individuals, not crowds. Battlefield stories read like early marksmanship myths. The officer who never ducked learning one afternoon why men do, the standard bearer dropping mid-gesture, the siege engineer on a ladder who thought he had the angle until a line from nowhere disagreed. The scorpion turned space into a contract. Peak and you pay. It is not loud, it is not theatrical, and that's the horror. Just a clean mechanical process that hires gravity for the last couple dozen yards. Defenders tried screens, hanging hides, and portable mantlets to mask movement and blur edges. Attackers countered by shifting positions and learning the castle's breathing rhythm, when men must move and where they must stand. The duel is ancient and modern at once. Hide, look, strike, vanish. What soldiers feared most about scorpions was the sensation of being chosen by something they could not see. A good crew masked the shot with routine noises, waited for wind to help, and released when shadows favored them. Bolts arrived before dread did, and dread lingers when men cannot assign blame to a visible, chargeable thing. Invisible death is not poetry. It is doctrine, break morale with the idea of inevitability. The best crews were craftsmen with calloused hands and clockwork patience. They learned which bundles liked which humidity, which darts flew true in morning chill versus noon heat, when to shorten ahead to catch less air, and when to aim not at a man but at the gap he must fill to do his job. They earned oaths from comrades and curses from enemies. If you wanted to watch future centuries being invented, you didn't stare at the crown jewels. You watched the men who turned twine and wood into fate at 400 yards. And so the episode resolves into a triangle of fear: the Morning Star's up-close certainty, the ballista's flatline ruin, and the scorpion's whispering choice. None are subtle in effect. All are simple in principle. Together they sketch a battlefield where courage matters, but mechanics gets the kill. From the spiked certainty of the Morning Star to the flat-shot brutality of the ballista and the invisible selections of the scorpion, medieval war proved that terror could be handheld or horizon-wide. Which frightens you more, the crunch you hear, or the bolt you never do? Comment your pick, share this with a friend who thinks plate solves everything, and subscribe so you don't miss Part 9, the Trebuchet's finale, and the lost arts that kept stone rooms warm.